Somewhere between Iran and Oman, there's a stretch of sea, just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Narrow enough that you could see both coastlines from a single ship. And yet, this one strip of water can decide whether you pay 80 rupees or 120 rupees for a liter of petrol in India. It's called the Strait of Hormuz. And right now in 2026, it's back at the center of a crisis that could shake economies from Mumbai to New York. So here's the real question: what actually happens if the Strait of Hormuz closes? Here's a question that sounds almost impossible. Can a narrow waterway, thousands of kilometers away, actually raise petrol prices at your local pump in India? The answer is yes, and it's happened faster than you had think. The Strait of Hormuz controls the flow of more than 20% of the world's seaborne oil, including a major share of the crude that reaches Indian shore. India imports over 85% of the crude oil it uses. Most of the fuel powering our cars, our factories, our farms. It isn't ours to begin with. It has to travel here, and a significant part of that journey passes directly through the Hormuz. So, when this route comes under threat, even just the threat of a blockade, you get price spikes, inflation surges, and pressure on the rupee every single time, from your daily commute to the price of vegetables at the local market. The ripple effects of a Middle East conflict reach far deeper into Indian life than most of us realize. Between Iran and Oman lies a piece of geography that control a fifth of world's oil. Here exactly where it is and why the location itself is the whole story. The Strait of Hormuz is the only link connecting the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and from there to the rest of the world's ocean. At its narrowest point, it's just 33 km wide. Yet, every tanker leaving Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, or Iran has to pass through this one gap to reach open water. Persian Gulf to Arabian Sea to Indian Ocean. That's the route. India's western coastline, home to major ports like Mumbai, Kandla, sits barely 1200 kilometers away, directly in the path of nearly every Gulf oil shipment headed our way. Seven nations, one narrow gateway. That's the entire structure of Gulf energy trade right there. Every single day, 21 million barrels of oil passes through a gap you could cross by speedboat in 20 minutes. Here's why that makes the Strait of Hormuz the most dangerous checkpoint on Earth. That's over 20% of everything the entire planet consumes. Funneled through a channel. And it's not just oil. Nearly a third of the world's seaborne crude oil and LNG shipments transit through Hormuz. Almost one in every three tankers carrying energy across the ocean goes through this single strait. And here's the part that should really concern you. There's no real alternative. The pipeline built to bypass Hormuz can only carry a fraction of this volume. One strait, one blockade. Potentially a global economic crisis. 20% of the world's oil, nearly all of Qatar's gas. One strait carries all of it. Here are the numbers that prove it. Between 20 and 25% of all globally traded oil, roughly 17 to 21 million barrels a day, move through Hormuz, making it irreplaceable in the world's energy supply chain. Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter, ships almost all of it out through this same strait, powering homes in Japan, South Korea, China, and India, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Iran together account for over 30% of the world's total oil supply. And for nearly all of them, Hormuz is not just their main export route, it's their only one. Which means any closure wouldn't just disrupt shipping, it would trigger an instant global supply shock. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, here's exactly how much the world's oil supply run through just one state. Saudi Arabia, the world's single largest oil exporter, sends nearly all of its crude through Hormuz. Iraq and Kuwait together export more than 3 million barrels a day through it, with almost no pipeline backup. The UAE moves huge volumes of both crude and LNG through the same route. Qatar, the world's biggest LNG exporter, sends effectively 100% of that gas through the Hormuz. Iran's own oil exports depend on the very same waterway. It sometimes threatens to shut down. From there, the oil fans out to India, China, Japan, South Korea, Europe, and North America. Every major economy on earth is in some way downstream of this one strait. India imports over 85% of its oil, and most of it has to pass through one narrow strait to get here. Here's why that make India dangerously exposed. India's domestic oil production covers less than 15% of what the country needs. Around 60% of our imports come from Gulf nations, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, and Kuwait. Almost all of it routed through Hormuz before it reaches an Indian port. As the world's largest oil consumer, India imports close to 5 million barrels a day, fueling everything from our factories to our farm equipment. So, if Hormuz closes, even temporarily, it isn't a distant headline, it's an immediate shock. Crude prices rise, the rupee comes under pressure, and the government is forced to spend enormously just to keep price bearable for ordinary citizens. Picture this, the Strait of Hormuz shut down. Right now, here's what the world would feel within hours. 20 to 25% of all global seaborne oil is instantly stranded. Tankers that would normally cross in a day now have to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, adding 15 or more days to every voyage. Insurance costs explode almost overnight. War risk premiums can spike by 10 times their normal rate. Within days, refineries across Asia and Europe start facing feedstock shortages. Emergency rationing protocols get activated. Spot price for crude oil and LNG can surge 30 to 50% within just 48 hours. And the fallout doesn't stay the shipping lanes. It spread into inflation spike, stock market sell-offs, and currency pressure, hitting import dependent nations like India especially hard. On one side, Iran repeatedly threatening to shut the strait. On the other, the US Navy patrolling to keep it open. Here's the standoff sitting on top of the world's most important waterway. Iran controls the entire northern shore of the Strait of Hormuz. The United States keeps its fifth fleet stationed in Bahrain specifically to patrol the Persian Gulf and counter Iranian influence in the region. Energy security, military power, and geopolitics all colliding in 133-kilometer stretch of water. 1973, 2008, 2019, 2022. Every time tensions spike near Hormuz, oil prices explode. Here's the pattern in numbers. During the 1973 oil crisis, prices surged roughly 300% in weeks. In 2008, amid Gulf tension, oil spiked to $147 a barrel. In 2019, when Saudi Aramco's facility were hit by drone strike, Brent crude jumped as much as 40% intraday before settling around 15% up. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, oil topped $130 a barrel globally. Every time the pattern repeats, escalation near Hormuz leads to tanker attacks or sanctions, which leads to market panic, which leads to prices spiking within hours. So, what happens if Hormuz actually closes fully but just get threatened? Some analysts project oil could cross $200 a barrel, petrol up 30 rupees a liter, inflation up to 2%, the rupee falling. Yes, exactly how a Hormuz crisis hits your wallet in India. Petrol prices. Since India imports around 85% of its crude, a Hormuz crisis could push petrol up 15 to 30 rupees a liter within weeks. Inflation. Rising fuel costs cascade into food and manufacturing cost. India's CPI inflation could jump 1.5 to 2.5%. Rupee. A bigger oil import bill widens Indians' current account deficits, weakening the rupee, and a weaker rupee makes imports even more expensive, feeding the cycle further. The government's burden to protect citizens from the full shock. The government typically steps in with fuel subsidies, straining the fiscal budget, and plugging fund away from infrastructure. Petrol, inflation, the rupee, the budget. One closure in the Middle East, four separate shockwaves through the Indian economy. 10 to 15 extra days at sea, trade costs of 500%. Here's what a Hormuz closure does to global trade everywhere, not just India. Container shipping routes would have to reroute around Africa, triggering port congestion and cargo backlogs across Asia, Europe, and Americas. Just in time, manufacturing start to break down. Auto plants and electronics factories risk halting production. Hard components and fuel stop arriving on schedule. Gulf nations export 15 to 20% of world's fertilizer supply. A Hormuz blockade chokes those shipments too, driving up food production costs and threatening food security across South Asia and Africa. Steel, cement, chemicals, plastics, energy intensive industries everywhere face soaring costs. Some estimates suggest global GDP growth could slow by 1 to 2%, with emerging economies bearing the brunt. Pipelines, reroutes, alternative routes. Can any of them actually replace the Strait of Hormuz? Let's do the math. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline can carry around 5 million barrels a day. Though it's only partial operational, the UAE Upsan to Fujairah pipeline adds about 1.5 million, bypassing Hormuz into the Gulf of Oman. The aging Iraq-Turkey pipeline contributes a limited 0.6 million. Add it all up. Total bypass capacity is roughly 7 million barrels a day. Compare that to the 21 million barrels a day that normally flows through Hormuz. A shortfall about 14 million barrels, a 67% gap that simply cannot be rerouted. No combination of pipeline can fully replace the Strait of Hormuz. The world remains highly exposed. This is not a hypothetical, it's happening right now. Here's why Hormuz is back in the headline in 2026. Through 2025 and into 2026, renewed standoff between Iran and the United States, drone strike on tankers, and ongoing proxy conflicts have pushed Hormuz right back to the center of global security concern. Brent crude has already spiked sharply on multiple occasions following naval incident and fresh threats to close the strait. Shipping insurance costs for vessels crossing the Persian Gulf have surged 300 to 500%. Here in India, the government and energy ministry are watching closely, fast-tracking strategic oil reserve builds and accelerating renewable energy plants. This is an active flashpoint, shaping fuel prices right now in real time. Here's the bottom line on the Strait of Hormuz and why it should matter to you. A local conflict thousands of kilometers away can very quickly become a global economic problem. The strait carries over 20% of the world's seaborne oil. Its closure sends price shocks rippling across every continent almost instantly. For India, the vulnerability is real, with over 85% of our crude imported, and any disruption translates directly into rising petrol prices, a weaker rupee, a higher inflation. The lesson for 2026 and beyond is simple. Energy diversification is not optional anymore. In a world disconnected, every nation, including ours, has a stake in what happens in one narrow strip of water on the other side of the world. So, here's a question for you. Should India be working harder to reduce its dependence on Middle East energy imports? Can renewable energy realistically close that gap? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I had genuinely like to know where you stand. And if this helped you understand why a strait you had probably never heard of can move the price of a petrol, what happens if the Gulf never really stays in the Gulf?